This should be really fun. Really excited for this one. As I am with all of these, but this one in particular, I'd never heard the phrase "unblending the funnel" until we were chatting, Josh. So I'm excited to hop into this one here.
Yeah, I wish I remembered who first, who I first heard that from. But there's multiple kind of different ways of talking about what we're about to talk about, and I'll probably mention a few of those.
Amazing. Well, why don't we get into it? We got folks coming in. Josh, why don't you give us just kind of quick background on yourself here, and then I know we've got a lot to cover. We've got 30 minutes allocated, so let's just get into the content here, and hopefully make Rev Ops a little bit easier for the folks listening.
Yeah, so my name is Josh Pudnos. I'm located in New York City. I've been head of Rev Ops for a few different companies, primarily at this growth stage where there's a lot of them growing from 30, 40, 50, 60 million, want to get to 100 million plus and beyond, and being a big part of that scaling motion. So that's what gets me really excited. I'm actually starting something new next week that not disclosing yet, but again, another really rapidly growing company, really exciting stuff, and I think this is a key part of what I'm going to be doing, and even part of how I got the job is talking about this exactly what we're talking about, which is unblending the funnel. And so we'll talk about then kind of going into maybe the agenda here. What does that mean? How do we use it? Why do we use it? What are some of the metrics we should be looking at? And then I'll even give sort of a part of an example in how I might operationalize this unblended funnel.
Really looking forward to it. So just a couple quick reminders. We'll share the recording here with everybody that's listening. If you have any questions as we go, there's a Q&A function in the bottom. Feel free to click on that. Ask any questions that you might have as we start to cover it. We'll be kind of peppering in questions throughout and also saving a couple for the end that we've already gotten. So amazing. Looking forward to diving in here, Josh.
Yeah, so this will be a bit of a presentation, but like let's make this conversational. Want it to be engaging and valuable for you guys. Again, this has been what's successful for me. I think a lot of the go-to-market leaders I talk about their operating rhythm, and in RevOps, we're the ones that operationalize that. You have an annual plan, and I'm about to talk about this in a second. You talk about your budget for the year. We have to hit this number by the end of the year, the quarter, whatever period that may be. Um, and in so much ways, we're the ones who have to really understand that, understand how are we tracking to that, and why are we off course, are we on course, and like what can we do to fix that? And that's all. That's what this is all about. So I'll first talk about that operating rhythm. It's different for every business, and you want to make an agreement with your go-to-market leadership about what works for them, what's going to be most impactful, but some sort of like regularly, some regular cadence where you're diving into the numbers or a certain group of the numbers on a weekly basis, and it may be different. In the past, I've worked with it might be my CMO, CRO, and with Chief Customer Officer all at the same time, looking at all the numbers together. And I think that drives a lot of great alignment. I might have separate conversations with just the CMO where we're talking top of the funnel data and looking at a certain channel and how that's performing. But the point is to look at this on a regular basis so that you can identify problems early on and understand why you're having that problem, or maybe on the flip side, why are we having success? Um, and how can we duplicate that? Or what strategic decisions can we make to uh, get us on the right track? So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's on a weekly or biweekly, some sort of more frequent cadence, and then monthly, it's about okay, we've done these actions to correct the correct course. What impact does that have on the quarter, or what impact does that have on the half of the year? Meeting quarterly to be able to discuss those things, how the business is doing at a higher level, and what impact does that have on the end of the year and into next year if you have a longer sales cycle? And then, of course, an annual cadence where you're looking at all these numbers, but also, and we'll talk a little bit about the work that has to go into this to project this forward for the next year. But you're going to be hopefully at some point working on a plan for next year, and that should be informed by a lot of these data as well.
Josh, one question that already started to come in is how do you keep folks focused when you're meeting with them weekly? I think one of the challenges that we've heard in the past is folks getting like really burned out with these meetings. They start out really strong. It's like, yes, we're all, excited to be here. We're all excited to dive into this. Over time, it can start to feel a little bit more like a chore.
Yeah.
How do you keep people like engaged, interested? How do you make sure that these, kind of meetings stay, as helpful as they probably should be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's all about this the corrective action piece. I'm gonna use another stolen phrase, and again, I wish I could attribute it to the right person, but Rev Up should be about telling the news or making the news rather than telling it. So I think it can get monotonous and boring when you're in there like, all right, well, we got six new SQLs last week, and like that is not interesting. Yes, I would check out as well. The biggest data nerd in the world is going to check out on that. But if you say, hey, we are, 17% below our pipeline number of SQLs this month. Again, last month we were 10 behind. This is trending this way. And when we dig into the numbers, and I'll show you guys how to do this, when we double click and double click and double click and get to the most granular level, we can see that this is happening in our business. I think it's because X, Y, and Z reason. I validated that using these methods, and here's what we're going to do about it. And like, let's talk about the buy-in, what change we're going to bring about in that part of the organization or across the organization to improve that. And then next week we're gonna follow up and see is that working? How well is that working? And continuing to iterate on that. So that's the piece that I think is what's missing for a lot of folks. And again, I'll show you how to get there.
Super helpful. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks. Yeah. And I think another thing that's really missing from like these cadences, whenever you're meeting with your VP of sales or your CRO or talking about the numbers, we're on track, we're off track. Great. That's certainly important. But why? And what there are 10 different reasons probably why we're on or off track and then 10 more reasons for each of those like things that we can be doing differently. Which ones should we do? What can we actually operationalize and how are we gonna move the needle? So what is I'm going to use these sort of interchangeably, but unblending the funnel. We're going to unblend the funnel. The funnel we have, if we get 100 SQLs, we're going to, 80% of those are going to convert to stage one or whatever your stages may be. And 50% of those are going to convert to stage two and 20. You have this funnel, and you could say like, that's the business. That's how we get to, we need to hit $83.5 million next year. That's how you get there. But to unblend it means to there are elements within each of within the broader funnel that really help illuminate how your business is working. And so unblending the funnel means I want to see at the most granular level that makes sense. How is my business working? How are we getting a lead in? Where is it coming from? And how does that convert through the funnel? Um, so what does it mean to unblend the funnel? To me, this is essentially the top down versus bottoms up revenue model. Revenue model, again, kind of the same thing. Like we get this, it's going to convert at this rate, at this dollar size, and it's going to yield this result. And so a lot of times you'll get a top down number from finance and the executive team. The example I give here is like, we're at $20 million this year. We want to grow 50% next year. That means at the end of next year, we need to hit $30 million. Um, that's great. It's good to have goals, but how are you going to get there? And that is the bottoms up model, and you get to that bottoms up model by unblending the funnel. So to do this, you break down the business into those units, segments, markets that apply most to your company. Maybe you're very geographically based. Maybe you have certain industry verticals that are really important, and the teams that focus on those things behave different from others. Like behavior is going to be really important because you're going to look at historical numbers and see this team or this region or this segment or this unit, they behave this way. And so we can expect them to behave more or less the same in the next period that we're talking about here. And so you may also want to look at, maybe new business versus expansion. And because, the dollar value, the dollar size of the average deal there is going to be different. The sales cycle is going to be certainly different. And so you want to take these into consideration, what makes most sense for you. So you break those down. Once you have those units or segments or markets, break it down by each channel. So maybe it's, also you want to be able to have a lot, high fidelity in the data here. So are we talking about, if the trust that you have in the data is only as granular as like this is inbound, outbound, partnership, like great, do that. What makes most sense for your business? If you can get deeper and deeper, better. I'm gonna ignore for a second the whole attribution debate. That is really difficult. I think again, choose what makes sense for your business and where you have, a lot of conviction around what the data means. Um, and again, how the data behaves. If there is no real difference in your business between, you know, inbound form fill out, or like organic versus inbound paid search, like maybe you don't need to go that granular. But if there is major differences in the ACV, for example, the average contract value, or the sales cycle, or whatever that may be, that's going to be important to consider. So I kind of talk about a little bit about that. Get as granular as you can reasonably do with a lot of confidence around that data. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, historically, this unit, this channel has performed this way. Average contract value, average sales cycle, conversion rate, and then project that forward. Okay, well, if that channel in that market performs this way, we expect this amount, this number of deals in at this rate, and it's going to close this date, this far out, based on the conversion and all these historicals. We're going to want to look at conversion rates are really kind of tricky to do it well. I think, there's 10 different ways of measuring a conversion rate. Um, and they serve different purposes. I find the best way to do it is to look at a cohorted view, which means, you look at a certain period and say, it's sort of a historical look back. Uh, of the, I'm going to make this up, 100 SQLs, and we can all define that differently, but 100 opportunities created from, North America, Western Territory, uh, on a mid-market segment. There were 100 of those, and 1 month later, there, 20% of those closed one. That's a 20% conversion rate. You need to, there's a lot of considerations you need to think of, well, again, what makes most sense for your business, looking at the right time horizon, but it's a little tricky. So pick the one that makes most sense for you and your business. I'm gonna look at the ACV, the sales cycle. And then looking forward as you sort of project out, are there certain assumptions you have about the improved efficiency of the business? Are you making new investments? Are you hiring a new team and that's going to impact the model in a certain direction one way, like this is going to increase the number of outbound opportunities that we expect starting in July. And once you plot all this out, you can, it levels up to each other and builds upon each other, and then ultimately you have sort of that top line number, um, that that the higher level numbers are what you ultimately share with your executive team, your board. And so we'll kind of dive into. I'll show some more examples of like what getting granular looks like a little bit more. But Josh, maybe I'll check and see if there are any questions at this point.
I think one that comes up a lot is how you think about the bake-in considerations or the assumptions that come up here. Is that
Yeah.
something that you think that Rev Ops should own? Sometimes it's owned by the CRO. I've actually seen that in cases where it's owned by finance. So, like, who should own that, and who's responsible for it if it works out really well, or in some cases it doesn't work out very well?
Yeah, you know, I think it's my belief that RevOps should own the end number and even the considerations, but it should be a dial, and really we should be own the conversation around what drives those decisions. It's going to depend a lot on the strength of the individual leaders within finance and at the your CRO. Maybe they have certain strengths, maybe that like that would allow them to take ownership of those. So there's no perfect answer, but I think we should be the ones saying, hey, like, pointing out some of the blind spots to these numbers. And this is why RevOps is so important. A lot of times, a lot of times this sort of motion belongs to like an FP&A team, but they are not as familiar with so many of the intricacies of the business, the way that RevOps is. And so, and I think I'm going to talk about. So you mentioned, or we bake in the assumptions about adding in. I think it's important to be able to maybe be able to model out different scenarios here. What happens if we hire 8 people instead of 6? What happens if we hire them sooner? What happens if we improve this conversion rate because we do these things? Like we're putting in this new piece of technology, this new product. This new product's going to come out. It's going to increase pipeline by this much. Like that's a conversation you should be facilitating with your leadership team, and collectively we all sort of agree, yeah, that seems like reasonable. I can sign up for that plan. And so I'm gonna get through this really quick because it makes a lot of sense. So like when you develop this, let's say we're doing this, we're putting together this bottoms up model. We've unblended the funnel and put it together a revenue model for next year's plan. It's beginning of 2026, so you're not going to do this for a while, but typically it looks like, the highest level coming down with that top down number. We want to see something about 80% or 50% or 30%, whatever it may be. And then we start building that bottoms up revenue model using those historicals and assumptions, socialize, get agreement on some of those numbers, those assumptions. You sort of bake it and hand it back. It gets chewed up. Usually it comes back and they say, we don't like that, or we're not so sure we want to take that level of risk and such and such. Um, Rarely is it some sort of conversation where they say, oh, shave off 12% of this and that. It's usually like much more high level. So, they chew it up. You take those considerations, you rework the numbers, and then, sometimes there's a back and forth, but that's typically how it goes. And so it's a very collaborative effort because you need to make sure that marketing, sales, CS, anybody else that may be part of the equation, certainly finance, is all on board with this plan. But it's the mechanics of it that really RevOps should own.
Josh, how do you think about the conversation when the gap between what maybe the board and the exec team are coming out with is, significantly different than call it the bottoms up build that's coming from RevOps and finance? I think what we found typically is that, RevOps and finance are usually coming with a bit more of a conservative estimate, I would say. Let's say that the bottoms up model is showing like, if we, based on these key assumptions, we hit 20% growth. The plan from the exec team, the board is, we need to hit 100% growth this year. Like, how do you have that conversation with the folks? How do you get, alignment when like the gap is just so big?
Yeah. Um, I think if you've done this process correctly, as you're socializing the assumptions, the built-in improvements with your executive term or the folks that are involved in this process, if you've done that weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual cadence with them all along, then they should know very well what those core, like the performance of the business, why it's behaving that way. And so if you have that conversation, it should be typically it would happen like this. This CFO might say, "Hey, we're hearing the board is expecting 60% growth next year." And you're like, okay. And then, you plug it in and very quickly, you should be able to align on like based on if we make no changes next year, no investments, we do the exact same thing, we're going to get to 48%. And so like, can we feasibly, like, what is it going to take? Is it going to take more money, more whatever? We cannot muscle our way to, I forget what number I said, but 12% improvement on conversion rate alone with no changes next year. So like again, there's so many different levers we can pull. There's pricing, there's new products that may come to play. There's spending more on marketing or shifting investments into other arenas that are going to have a higher, faster payout. But it's in that effort where you go like, I can't model the like any way I model this, best case scenario, we're getting to, I think just like it's a very reasonable conversation, and you armed them with the many arguments, and very often, usually RevOps is not always at that board level. We're not having those board conversations, so it's arming your C-suite with the firepower to say like, this is just not feasible unless we make additional investments, or unless X, Y, and Z happen. There's a considerable amount of risk to your expectations. And so, yeah, I think hopefully they're there with you pretty early on, be like, this is an outrageous assumption. And so again, that's why it's a back and forth dialogue with the executive team, and then between them and the board.
Yeah, I love the idea of tying the operating cadence to this. I think you're right. Where I've seen this go, kind of the hairiest, and probably done it myself many times more than I'd like to admit, is when it becomes a surprise that there's this big gap, and I think that's what happens when you don't have that operating cadence in place. So, no, super helpful. But we've heard this one come up so frequently, especially this time of year, as everyone's trying to button up these like annual plans. So,
Yeah.
appreciate the perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, and then hopefully you land on a number, and you say, all right, this is the number. This is how we're going to get there. These are the changes that we need to make. Like, let's go forth and make those changes. And again, back to that weekly cadence, you're making changes on a weekly basis, potentially, to your motion, your eliminating friction in the buyer journey. But there may be some larger initiatives that need to happen, and you're going to develop your Rev Ops strategic initiative plan around a lot of these. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of these because I think a lot of folks in Rev Ops are pretty aware of a lot of these. Uh, some make sense to dive into on that more regular basis, especially if you're all over the place, if your conversion rate is all over the place, for example, like that, the conversion from, I'm calling it SQL to close one, or maybe, stage one to opportunity created to close one. Maybe it's from stage to stage. Like some of these may not make sense for you guys to look at on it's not going to move by more than a percentage point that often. But for some of your businesses, it may be something, or it may be all over the place, and you have to say, hey, like, in one of my former businesses, that conversion rate was all over the place from month to month. We would look at it on a cohorted basis, and in making this up, but in June it was 7%, and in July we converted 30% of those SQLs into closed one, with a 3 month look back. And from a CFO perspective, you're asking like, hey, I want regularity in my business. Like, why, what's leading to that? And so that prompted a big deep dive into the numbers, and big research analysis. And those are like really good, and like awesome things came out of that. Some really great insights came out of that question. And so it's sort of an example of like how we use that weekly cadence to ask questions about why things are performing the way that they are, and underperforming, overperforming, strangely performing. Um, but again, a lot of times some of these numbers are not moving frequently. ACV might be another example. Like, that might be steadily going up, and it's good to quickly look at that, but you're not going to dive into that on a weekly basis. Whereas, the MQLs and number of deals created, pipeline created, closed one might be. And so yeah, again, looking at these on a different, looking at them as different lines of business for each region, each segment are really important. So this is more of just like a leave behind page. Any questions here before we kind of dive into how to operationalize this?
No, let's get to operationalizing. I'd say just
Cool.
from what it's worth, when I was previewing this and now seeing it again here now, I think that like this is a great minimum set of metrics for folks to get to. If you don't have these in the business today, like I would highly recommend getting to these. These are the metrics that we're hearing consistently across RevOps execs board meetings. Like these are the ones that frankly matter at the executive level. So I think if you can get a good grip on this, it's a great starting point as you move into like deeper dives that you're kind of alluding to next.
Cool. All right. So I'm gonna run through this really quickly. Sorry. So the responsibilities of this, not just owning the data. So much of this has to be around ensuring everyone is aligned on the definitions and how you are the calculations. Again, that can I've talked about how we are calculating conversion rate over months, and we've redone it multiple times because different calculations kind of serve different purposes. If you want it more as a vanity metric and say our business is doing well because we convert 20% of our deals, like great, but that the way that you calculated that number may not serve your revenue model. And so making sure everyone's aligned about how that, how it's calculated and why it's behaving the way that it behaves is really important. And then again, um, I think it's not just about highlighting that we're off track, but understanding where in the business and why and how you can fix that, and then how the efforts to fix being off track have improved. Is it working or is it not? So that's going to be really kind of like the focus of what's next. So much of what helps me in this is really plotting out the projected number based on that, the assumptions in your revenue model that having unblended it, and then comparing it against the actuals. And then where you can see a delta between the two, that's you know that's where you want to focus. And so here are just some graphs I made. This is all dummy data, but to sort of look at like if on the at the top of the funnel how this is working. You can also do this. I think you can do this again with churn data, and you should be even plotting out like what you're forecasting in terms of deals, customers churning based on their, if you're a revenue, if you're a SaaS company, based on when they're up for renewal. But you can dive into those there. And I think we're down to 3 minutes, so I'm gonna hurry. This is an example of a dashboard that I might have. And again, here I just broke out. Let's say I had just a North American business and a EMEA business. I want to break down all the channels. And then here are the actual numbers on the left side. On the right side is the variance from the target number based on like I'm looking at this one right here. Like today is I'm making this up, the 30th week of the year. And so we would expect to be at 376, let's say. And oh, yep, we're on target because this is green. And so where you see red, that's where you want to focus. And then you start saying, okay, well, we're seeing some problems here and here. So let's double click, and you start going deeper, and you double click and go, okay, North America outbound, everything's more or less on track. Let me go into the inbound channels, and I'm gonna go deeper. And just as you double click, you can start seeing this one's on track, this is on track, this is on track, this one's off track, and then you can start digging into why and when did it start going off track based on your assumptions, based on where you think we should be. And ultimately, like maybe it's okay that we're off track because everything else is overperforming. But what can you do today? And in the essence of time, here are just some examples of things that might come out of this exercise, and you might say, "Hey, we're off track here. Like, what is causing that, and what can we do to remediate that problem?" And I think that's it. And sorry, I always had to rush at the end there, but I can certainly stay on a little extra for questions if there are any.
No, not at all. I think Josh, this is amazing. I think one of the common challenges we hear from folks is how do I actually connect like these high level metrics? I see that my actuals are not, tracking towards the targets. How do I understand what isn't working within them? Especially when you think about these like blended metrics, right? We want to get in like the executive team is typically getting to those, kind of top line metrics like, new ARR to get really, kind of under, the hood, if you will, and see, kind of where within that are we, tracking to your point. I love what you mentioned earlier around, we probably need to focus actually on like where success is coming from. I think that's one area that we typically see is kind of like under optimized often. Rev Ops is constantly wanting to dive into the problem areas, which like we should definitely understand. But I think equally, if not more important, is actually, why are we seeing more success in some of these channels as well? So no, I think this has been, incredibly helpful, even for me personally. So Josh, I want to thank you again for taking the time out. I know we covered a lot of ground here. If folks have other questions, like where's the best place for them to kind of find you? Is LinkedIn kind of the right place? If folks
Yeah.
want to reach out and kind of dive a little bit deeper here.
Yeah, please connect me on LinkedIn, send me a message, ask your questions. Like I really want to give back to this community and help each other out. This is how we all get better.
Josh, we really appreciate it. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sharing the recording with everybody here. If you have any questions, find Josh on LinkedIn, reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you as well. But thanks again, and have a great rest of the day here.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care. Thanks, everybody.